They say the real battle isn't always fought with weapons. Sometimes it's fought with numbers, with policies, with bold words spoken from podiums, and silent strategies made behind closed doors. In this modern-day battlefield, the question is no longer about who has the biggest army, but who controls the supply chains, the resources, the factories, and the future. And in that arena, one man stood on stage and said, "America first." But in a world where everything is connected, can one country truly win a war that divides the world? Can Trump win a trade war with China? Sometimes we look at the news and see words like trade war, tariffs, or import taxes, and we scroll past them. We think that's politics, that's economics, that has nothing to do with me. But it does. It always does. Because behind those technical terms are real people, real lives, and and the truth is, a trade war is never just about numbers or taxes. It's a reflection of something much deeper, a battle of values, power, identity, and pride. When two nations clash over trade, it's easy to imagine it as a boardroom fight. Suits, documents, signatures. But beneath that surface, there's tension that stretches across oceans. There's history. There's unspoken resentment. There's fear. Fear of being left behind. Fear of losing control. Fear of depending too much on someone else. And most of all, fear of looking weak. That's why trade wars feel so personal, even if we don't realize it. Think about it. A president stands at a podium and announces new tariffs. It sounds strong. It sounds bold. It sounds like he's protecting his people. But what we don't hear in that moment is the quiet panic of a small business owner who just found out the cost of importing parts for his product will double next month. We don't see the silent struggle of a family who realizes that the cost of their groceries is creeping up little by little, not because of inflation, but because the packaging, the contents, the transport, everything just became more expensive. And maybe we don't hear the tears of a worker whose factory can't compete anymore, whose job is now on the line. Because in a trade war, factories close, deals break, jobs disappear. That's the thing, you can't tariff pain. You can't quantify human cost, because trade isn't just about products. It's about people. Every shoe manufactured, every phone assembled, every box shipped across the world, all of it carries the fingerprint of someone who woke up early, went to work, and hoped their effort would be enough to bring food to the table. But when a trade war begins, it's no longer just about goods. It becomes a competition of national pride. One country says, "We deserve better." The other says, "We won't back down." And suddenly, what could have been resolved through quiet talks becomes a global shouting match. And in between those shouts are people like you and me. And people are the ones who carry the burden when things fall apart. Some call a trade war a strategy. Others call it a mistake. But maybe what we really need to call it is a wake-up call. Because it reminds us that in a global world, no one stands alone. We are connected more than we think. What affects one country doesn't stay within its borders. A decision made in Washington echoes in the rice fields of Southeast Asia, in the ports of Europe, in the factories of Africa. There's no isolated gain. No one wins without someone else losing something. That's why this conversation matters. Because when we talk about trade wars, we're not just talking about politics or economics. We're talking about humanity, about the unseen impact, about the cost of pride, the value of cooperation, and the importance of thinking long term. And maybe, just maybe, the strongest nation isn't the one that builds walls or draws lines in the sand. Maybe it's the one that understands that real strength is found in humility, in listening, in valuing not just the deal on the table, but the hands that made it possible. So the next time we hear the words trade war, let's not scroll past. Let's pause. Let's think. Let's remember. It's more than tariffs. It's more than policies. It's people. And they deserve more than being treated like pawns in a game no one asked them to play. Some decisions look strong from the outside until you start feeling their weight from the inside. There was a moment in time when the world watched one man step up to the microphone and say enough. Enough of unfair trade deals. Enough of dependency. Enough of China outpacing American industries. And for some people, that moment felt empowering, like finally, someone was willing to fight back. And he did, with confidence. But the question is, was that boldness enough? Because the thing about bold moves is they can light a fire or burn everything down. That's what made his strategy so gripping. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't careful. It didn't ask permission. It was direct, confrontational, and unapologetically nationalistic. Tariffs were slapped on Chinese goods. Trade agreements were pulled apart. Diplomatic norms were disrupted. And everything was framed around one promise: to make America great again. But greatness is not built on headlines. It's tested in the everyday lives of people. And soon, reality began to set in. Because while some cheered over taking a stand, others started to feel the pressure of that stand. Especially the very workers and families that strategy was meant to protect. Farmers who once shipped soybeans to China suddenly had nowhere to sell their crop. Small businesses who relied on Chinese materials saw their costs double. Manufacturers who were promised a resurgence began laying off workers because they couldn't compete in a world now shaken by uncertainty. It wasn't just about punishing China. It was about whether America was ready for the consequences of doing it that way. See, boldness without a backup plan can feel reckless, and confrontation without coordination can leave even the strongest economies limping. That's what makes this strategy so risky, because on paper, it was clear-cut. Pressure China to play fair, use tariffs as leverage, force better deals, win back control. But the world doesn't work on paper. It moves in complexities. And the global economy doesn't bend easily. It pushes back. And when it pushed back, it hit where it hurt the most, the wallets of ordinary people. Because a trade war doesn't end at the negotiating table. It stretches to the aisles of grocery stores. It trickles into job markets. It sneaks into prices and products and payrolls. And in that war, the ones who feel it first aren't politicians. They're the people who don't get to decide policy, only live with it. Yes, there was courage in trying to reset the balance, in refusing to be dependent, in demanding fairness. But even courage must be paired with caution, especially when the stakes are this high, because when you shake the table, everyone sitting at it gets affected. And the other side didn't back down either. They imposed their own tariffs, found new trade partners, invested in alternatives. They didn't just endure the pressure, they adapted, silently, steadily, and strategically. Because sometimes not reacting loudly is the strategy. And maybe that's where the danger lies, in thinking the loudest move is the smartest one. In assuming that shouting America first means others will fall in line. They didn't. The world adjusted. Global trade reconfigured. And in many ways, the impact is still being felt. Long after the microphones were turned off and the applause faded. Because bold doesn't always mean right, and loud doesn't always mean wise. But here's the truth. Every leader makes choices. Some play it safe, others take risks. And sometimes those risks bring results. But other times they leave wounds that take years to heal. And the hard part, It's the people who carry those wounds, not the ones who made the choices. So yes, the strategy was bold. It disrupted, it demanded attention, it made headlines. But it also left questions in its wake. Was the cost worth it? Did it bring lasting change? Or did it just stir a storm without building shelter? Because in leadership, just like in life, what matters most isn't just the noise we make, but the lives we protect, the futures we build, and the hearts we don't break along the way. There are battles you fight with words, and there are battles you fight with silence. Not everything needs a loud reaction. Not every move needs to be seen right away, because sometimes the strongest response is patience. When the world watched the United States take a bold and aggressive stance in the trade war, all eyes turned to China, waiting for a reaction, expecting a counterattack, anticipating a collapse. But none of that came. Not immediately, not dramatically, not emotionally. Instead, China stood still, at least on the surface. But under that stillness was movement. Quiet, calculated, controlled. And that's the thing about patience. People mistake it for weakness. But real patience, the kind rooted in strategy and long-term vision, that's not weakness. That's power in its most disciplined form. While tariffs were being fired like bullets and headlines were screaming about economic war, China was doing something different. They were adjusting, slowly, steadily, silently. They weren't shouting back. They were building, strengthening, diversifying. They found new trade partners, invested in domestic industries, poured resources into innovation and infrastructure. They took the hit because they know what many forget. Not every response needs to be instant to be effective. There's something about their approach that's rooted in their history. Thousands of years of survival, of rebuilding after wars, invasions, isolation. Their culture is one that understands time. They don't just think in election cycles or quarterly reports. They think in decades, in generations. So while others rush to win the moment, China waits to win the era. That's what resilience looks like. It's not just about how hard you hit back. It's about how well you absorb the blow and how wisely you use the time it takes to recover. And they did. Factories didn't shut down. Exports didn't collapse. Growth slowed, yes, but it didn't stop. And instead of panicking, they pivoted. Expanded trade through Asia. Strengthened ties with Africa. The world is big. And while one door was closing, 10 others were quietly opening. They didn't need to prove anything on camera. They didn't need to raise their voice. They simply showed. They could endure. And that's the part many underestimated. Because in the middle of a trade war, patience feels like inaction. But it isn't. It's preparation. They were preparing for the long game, building new systems, investing in technology, training their people, thinking ahead not just to survive the storm, but to come out stronger once it passed. And eventually it did. The shouting quieted, the drama faded, and when the dust settled, China was still standing. Not just standing, but moving forward. Slower maybe, but wiser. That's resilience. It's not about never falling. It's about getting up every single time. Without complaint, without chaos, without applause. It's knowing who you are so deeply that even when you're being challenged, you don't need to defend yourself with noise. You let time defend you. You let outcomes prove your worth. And perhaps that's what made the difference in this so-called trade war. One side reacted quickly and publicly, the other responded slowly and quietly. But the one who doesn't rush often ends up seeing more clearly. Because when emotions take over, strategy falls apart. But when patience leads, clarity follows. There's something deeply admirable about that kind of calm, that kind of restraint, that kind of quiet strength. It doesn't look like power, but it is. It doesn't look like pride, but it's deeper than pride. It's discipline. And in a world that constantly demands immediate results and instant gratification, sometimes the real victory belongs to the one who waits, who watches, who endures. So while others were watching for explosions, China was planting seeds. And now, years later, we're seeing those seeds grow into partnerships, industries, influence, because they understood one thing many forget. You don't have to fight every battle out loud. Some of the strongest victories are earned in silence. Sometimes, the biggest battles aren't fought by leaders. They're felt by the people who had no say in them. While countries argue and presidents make bold declarations, it's the ordinary people who live through the quiet consequences. No headlines, no press conferences, just real life, changing in ways they didn't ask for and can't control. That's what trade wars do. They don't just happen on news channels. They happen in grocery stores, in factories, in home. They happen when a father looks at the rising price of milk and wonders how to stretch what's left in his wallet until the end of the week. When a mother watches her child's favorite snack go up in price and pretends it's not a big deal. They happen when a small shop closes down because parts became too expensive to import, when a worker gets laid off because the company can no longer afford to keep everyone, when a local farmer stares at a warehouse full of unsold produce, all because the country that used to buy them has stopped returning calls. It's easy to talk about tariffs and policies like they're just numbers, but behind every percentage is a person. Behind every statistic is a story. Someone loses a job, someone cancels a plan, someone lets go of a dream. And the saddest part, most of these people didn't even know a trade war was coming. They were just living, trying, working hard, hoping for better days, and suddenly something far beyond their control starts shifting everything around them. The shelves don't look the same. The prices don't feel the same. The stress in the house starts growing, unspoken but heavy. And no one comes to explain why. That's how distant global decisions come crashing into local lives. Quietly, but forcefully. Not through loud speeches, but through gas bills. Not through political debates, but through an empty shift schedule pinned to a factory wall. And still, they endure. Because that's what everyday people do. They endure. They adjust. They carry the weight of decisions they never made. They find ways to smile, even when there's less on the table. They find ways to hope, even when the future feels more uncertain. But deep down, they know. They know they're not the ones being protected. They're the ones being overlooked, spoken for, sacrificed in the name of something they never agreed to. A stronger economy, they say. But how strong can an economy really be if its foundation people are quietly crumbling under the pressure? Because strength is not just measured in trade deals or export numbers. It's measured in the lives that thrive, the dreams that stay alive, the families that feel secure. When those things begin to break, we have to ask, who is this really working for? And maybe the answer isn't clear. Maybe it's complicated. Maybe it's political. But for the person working 2 jobs just to cover what one used to, it's not complicated at all. It's just hard. And in that difficulty, we see something so powerful. Resilience. Not the kind that's televised, the kind that happens in silence. The mother who finds a cheaper brand and smiles so her kids won't notice the difference. The father who quietly skips lunch so he can pay for his son's school shoes. The teenager who takes a weekend job to help out without ever being asked. These are the people no one talks about in trade wars. But they are the reason countries survive. They are the reason leaders have nations to lead. So when we talk about global strategies and economic shifts, let's not forget who's holding it all together. Who wakes up every morning and shows up, even when everything around them is changing. They are not weak. They are not voiceless. They are the ones carrying the quiet strength of a country. And maybe, just maybe, they're the ones we should be fighting for. In every battle, we're taught to look for a winner. It's human nature. One side wins, one side loses. It helps us make sense of conflict. It gives us closure. But what if not every war has a real winner? What if sometimes both sides lose something too big to measure? That's the quiet truth behind a trade war. It starts with pride, with power, with two nations standing their ground. One says, "You're taking advantage of us." The other says, "We won't be bullied." And before long, the words turn into actions. Tariffs are imposed, policies shift, deals are broken, and what began as negotiation becomes a standoff. From the outside, it looks like strength. It looks like leaders doing what they believe is best for their country. But look a little closer and you'll see something else. You'll see confusion in small business owners who can't keep up with sudden price changes. You'll see anxiety in families worried about how to pay for daily essentials that now cost more. You'll see hesitation in investors, layoffs in factories, silence in once busy shops. And yet, the world keeps asking, who's winning? Is it the country that imposed the highest tariffs? Is it the one that found the cleverest way around them? Is it the one whose leader speaks with the most authority? Or is it just a game where the scoreboard doesn't show the real cost? Because when the numbers are celebrated, like billions in tariffs collected, we forget to ask, from whom? Those billions don't come from the other country. They come from importers, from sellers, from buyers, from people, ordinary people. So who really wins? Is it the farmers whose exports now sit unsold because their biggest buyer turned away? Is it the factory worker whose job was tied to a supply chain that no longer exists? Is it the consumer who's now paying more for the same goods without knowing why? And then there's the bigger picture, the long-term impact that doesn't make it into headlines. The trust that's been broken, the partnerships that take years to build but only moments to destroy. The quiet shift of countries looking elsewhere, finding new alliances, building new deals that leave old friends behind. Even if one side gains something on paper, a better deal, a new policy, a moment of pride, can that truly be called winning if the cost was division, instability, and public struggle? The real winners in a trade war aren't always the countries involved. Sometimes, they're the ones watching from the sidelines, learning, adjusting, taking advantage of the chaos. And the real losers? They're not the politicians, not the negotiators. They're the families that have to cut back on essentials, the entrepreneurs who have to shut down, the young dreamers who suddenly face a shrinking job market. Because a trade war may be about national interest, but its consequences always fall on personal shoulders. It's easy to say this is for the greater good, but that phrase loses meaning when the people carrying the burden don't feel any of that good. So again, who really wins? Maybe the better question is, what are we trying to win? Is it power, independence, a seat at the top of a global table? Or is it respect, sustainability, fairness? Because if the goal is simply to beat the other, we all lose. Eventually. But if the goal is to build something stronger, something lasting, something rooted in cooperation instead of conflict, then maybe we start winning again. Not through tariffs, not through threats, but through listening, through humility, through remembering that behind every economic decision are real people with real needs and quiet hopes. The kind of hope that doesn't shout but whispers, "Please don't forget us." Because in the end, the true measure of success is not who stood taller in the storm, but who stood together. And if we can return to that, maybe, just maybe, we'll find a way to stop counting winners and losers and start creating a world where everyone rises. In every war, trade or otherwise, there are casualties and there are lessons. Maybe the point is not to win the trade war. but to ask at what cost, because in the fight for dominance, let us not forget the value of cooperation, the strength in unity, and the power of leading not with pride, but with purpose. The world is not waiting for who shouts the loudest. It's watching who listens the most, who thinks deeper, who leads wiser, and maybe, just maybe, the real winner isn't the one who crushes the other. It's the one who chooses to build, even after the war is over.